Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Silvates podcast. So I'm really excited to have Arwel on the podcast because he is a run leader and an osteopath, and he integrates both so seamlessly. So as a former runner slash not currently running, I'm interested in knowing how to start running, what kind of things come up when you do run in terms of injuries, how to self-manage, and how to integrate that sort of osteopathic style with the running. So thanks for joining me today, Arwel.
Thanks for having me on, Silvan. Yeah, I guess in terms of running, I think that the key, I think, with anything is enjoying it, right? I think people get bogged down in time, distance, and things first. But the reality of it is that people should just worry about kind of putting their shoes on and getting out the door. I think that's the first key to kind of, I guess, enjoying it, right? And finding what you enjoy. I know some people are restricted to tarmac and cities. For me, I'm lucky enough in South Wales to have access to mountains, coastal paths, cycle paths, you name it. And so kind of finding the places and spaces that you enjoy moving through definitely helps with that experience.
And that suddenly comes across because I've been stalking your social media and your Instagram stories, very much so. And you literally do practice what you preach. So I've seen you run literally in the city, up mountains, and I do wonder how you do that. But hey, that's not for me to wonder. That's for you to power through and survive. Um, and one of the things that I have been seeing is this uptick in running, where people are sort of posting like their Strava runs and things like that, and it just seems like it's boomed over the last few years. I don't know what it's been like on your end.
No, definitely. And I think if anything, I've probably tapped into that a little. I think around that time where COVID kind of restricted us to our, what was it, 30 minutes, 60 minutes? Can't remember the rule, but there was some form of rule where you're only allowed out for so long. And then I think people look to maximize that, right? They look to cover as much distance as possible and be on their feet for as long as they could, because it was that was the only sense of freedom that they kind of did have. And in turn, I think what's happened is that those that found that bug during COVID have brought friends, family, and kind of colleagues along. And so in the years since COVID and as the world's opened back up, I think we found that numbers at running clubs are on the up. Running events are kind of as populated as they'll ever be. I think London Marathon this year had the largest cohort they've ever had, and not only that, they've had even more applications for next year than they've ever had before. And so it's just a sign that I think overall there is this want to kind of get moving on 2 feet.
So I'm wondering what made you sort of start running in a more serious way now than before.
Yeah, I mean, my running journey probably started as I was transitioning out of playing rugby. I was an avid kind of weekend rugby player, train twice a week, play on the Saturday. Um, but then naturally being an osteopath, that doesn't tie in well with injuries and picking up niggles, or you can't really work and lose a couple of broken fingers every couple of weeks and so on. So I slowly started to kind of think, right, what could I do instead? Or not necessarily what I could do instead, but what I could do um, as an alternate to rugby. And I started running whilst playing rugby, and found myself really enjoying it. I do look back at what I did then, because I used to run the same 5K loop around my village. Um, and that was like 3-4 times a week, and it obviously worked. It was fairly monotonous by the looks of it. I didn't feel it at the time, um, but looking back, I think to myself, how in the world did I do that? Because if you asked me to go and run the same 5K loop 4 or 5 times a week now, I'd say you're crazy. Um, but I think maybe there was something rhythmic, something kind of metronomic about it that allowed me to build a habit in running. And so kind of there wasn't much variety in my running. It was very much running 5K at about the same speed, 3, 4, 5 times a week. Um, and then from there, it was building kind of towards cutting rugby out completely. And once I had, I'd made a decision to then go and join a local running club. So I joined Run for All in Neath. They are a very inclusive running club, and there's kind of, at the moment, I think anywhere from 350 to 380 members. And so we've got everyone from doing kind of couch to 5K all the way through to people running kind of 5Ks in 16 minutes, running marathons in 2 hours and 45, 50 minutes. So, polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but the club is built in a way that it can cater for all. And so that's the beauty to it. Why did I want to do it more seriously? I'm not sure. I think it's probably the competitive edge in me. Always been fairly competitive, and not having a team sport then that allows me to express that meant that I was like, right, I need to maybe do something more serious with the running, and I want to get better at it, and I want to beat myself at this, that, and the other. And so whether that be a park run time, whether that be a 5K personal best, whatever it may be, there's something that obviously drives me to want to get better. And I think that comes across in probably a lot of aspects of my life, whether that be osteopathy, running, or anything else.
Yeah, and I think, if anyone doesn't know Arwel, he's downplaying the number of injuries from rugby. I remember the broken fingers. I remember the broken face at one point.
Yeah, the cheekbone was always a good one.
Yep.
This one, I've always got to work out which one it is. But yeah, the right cheekbone was a good one, just around my final exams as well in fourth year. And so I remember kind of had a clinic, kind of worrying whether or not I'd be actually okay to kind of continue with my hours and actually complete my exam. But I was like, as long as the patient don't mind me looking like I do, then it doesn't affect my practice. So I was quite lucky in that sense. But yeah, that was poor timing.
Yeah, and I think I broke fingers playing volleyball coming up to my final year, so I completely sympathise with I need to get through this last year of BCom because I'm not doing this again.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of final 3 to 6 months is always the kicker. Kind of making sure you're kind of FCC ready is always the one that I think builds up the most kind of stress and anxiety in us all, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the things you said earlier was that you joined a running club. I wonder how important that was, or how, and if that sort of elevated how you approached running versus sort of, somebody who's just doing it on their own as a bit of recreational fun, for example.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a power in doing something as a group. And I think you see that in team sports. And I think the minute you start to do that in any other form, right? So I think the more collective you can be in any sense. So for running in particular, for me, I found that joining a running club meant that I could leech knowledge off others on how they got better from my point to where they were. The variety in training, the variety in coaching styles, the variety in routes. The number of places I've now been to on 2 feet that I did not know existed in my own, 10-mile kind of square of home is fascinating. And so that in itself was wild. And then we have a track session. And so that flipped that variety aspect on its head. So where I was running that same 5-kilometer loop repeatedly, I soon started to do kind of a lot harder, quicker stuff on a Monday night where we would meet at a track and there'd be a coached session. But then come a Wednesday night, we'd be doing those trips around the villages and the towns of Neath and kind of visiting places I'd, like I said, never been before, even though I've grown up there since I was kind of, as small as I could be. So yeah, I think that in terms of the joining the club, that was the nicest thing, was that you'd soon progress with others as well. I joined the club at very similar time to some other guys who joined the club, and it's been really fascinating watching us all push each other and kind of nudge each other along and keep each other accountable as well. Everyone has different things going on in their lives at different points in time. People get busy, but the minute that someone from the club misses a week's worth or 2 weeks worth of sessions, it won't be long before someone's in a WhatsApp DM or an Instagram DM going, where have you been, or what's up, is everything all right, kind of thing. And so that in itself, that kind of community aspect of it is huge. And so I do think there's the social side of your training, or running or whatever activity you choose is as important as any of the physical and kind of fitness based markers that may improve.
Yeah, and especially that community aspect really comes through, because as somebody who, used to play team sports in rugby, for example, running can be really isolating in a way. So like having that community based around it sounds like a really nice parallel to draw from.
Yeah, I think it is a social sport, rugby, isn't it? There's 15 of you on the field. There's pints flowing afterwards. It is very much, especially at the amateur level. I think it probably runs through to the professional level as well. But there's definitely a very social side to rugby. And so I think part of the fact I always get asked, do you miss rugby? And not necessarily. I don't think I do, and it's because there is such a social element to the running side of things. It might look a bit different, it might not be as many pints on a Saturday night or whatever it might be, but meeting at a park run on a Saturday morning and kind of enjoying kind of some good weather and a good 5K and maybe a coffee afterwards or whatever it might be. There's definitely this kind of, at least I find anyway, it's miles disappear the minute you're running them with people. What might feel like a hard 10 miles in the winter in the dark on your own soon becomes, that much easier when there's a group of 5, 6, 10 of you, all with the same kind of rhythm mentality, all kind of 1-2 stepping your way through kind of 10 miles or whatever it might be. But yeah, that community aspect, that social aspect is huge when it comes to kind of, I think, being consistent and not just consistent over a training block or plan, i.e. kind of 8 to 12 weeks, being consistent over a year, being consistent over 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I think that's where those habits, those goals, those targets are often achieved, is in the persistence of the work.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've seen certainly is not just the rise in people running, but coupled with that, the rise in injuries resulting from that. Not directly, but indirectly as well. I wonder what your thoughts are on some of the more common type of injuries that are coming across, and how osteopathy or how your practice integrates to it.
Mhm. Of course. I mean, you do see it, don't you? I think every running influencer I've seen on Instagram over the past 6 months has had some form of injury, and I think a lot of that comes down to load, right? It's overload, and kind of coming back to some kind of basic training principles is, if the overload is kind of above that the body can adapt, it's going to break down. And so often you'll find that it's too much too soon. Whether that be through volume or distance, whether that be through intensity. So maybe the distance hasn't changed too much, but we're running hard too many times in a given time frame. Or whether that be a mix of both, right? We're trying to push both at the same time and the body just can't cope. The other thing I think people avoid or kind of don't recognize enough is just kind of recovering quite as hard. I see many people out kind of on an evening of one week and then the morning of the next day. That in total just doesn't work very well for someone that maybe doesn't have the physical preparedness to kind of tolerate those types of forces on the body, right? I myself don't run probably more than 6 times a week at the moment, possibly 7 at a push. But I know when I've run 7 times in a week, my body's like, okay, let's take some time. And kind of, yeah, I've picked up little niggles here and there and had to listen to my own body. And I think listening to your body, understanding when to take a bit of a break or have a day off, there's nothing wrong with that, is vitally important. I mean, in terms of clinic, and what I see a lot of, tendinopathies tend to be kind of the biggest kind of group of issues that we see at the clinic. Had a couple of kind of bone stress injuries, which again comes from typically kind of overtraining or underfueling or a bit of both. And then naturally kind of with that, just small strains that aren't so, I guess, serious, but you don't want to be picking up too many of them. If you're continuing to pick up these small niggles and strains continuously, there's something wrong in your training. And whether that be a lack of mobility somewhere, whether that be just that you're doing too much too soon or too much in any given time. I'd say those are the three categories that I see most of at the clinic.
And so when somebody presents to you at the clinic and they're a runner, or when they've disclosed like they've been training and this is how they've had their injury, sustained their injury, what's your approach to how you look at it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that runners hate hearing is you can't run. So I think making sure that you understand that individual first is vitally important. What's their training history? What's their training age? Have they trained for 6 months prior to this injury? Is that as long as they've been running, or have they run for 10 years? Now, the way in which I deal with those two individuals will be very different. What other options does that individual have to them, right? Do they have options to cross-train? Do they have options to use facilities for this kind of strength and conditioning or rehabilitation side of things? Or are they a pure runner that loves running and just wants to get out 2-3 times a week and just loves being on their feet and outdoors? And so I think really in the same way that we take a kind of a case history for a patient for their pain, their injury, I think with anyone that comes through your door with a specific sport. So for me, like I say, it's often an endurance type sport now. People doing kind of running or sometimes triathlon. It's understanding what their week looks like, what their volume has looked like, not just prior to the injury, but prior to that block that may have caused the injury. Typically in like a marathon block, what you'll find is that people tolerate the first 4 weeks quite okay, and then through those middle 8 weeks, they'll start upping volume, going longer, holding on to pace for further distances, and there comes a week where they probably know they're at their limit, and instead of maybe shifting and maneuvering their kind of deload week a week earlier and just kind of letting their body have the adaptation time needed, they persist with the plan because it's written down on their plan and so on, and they end up picking something up that's a bit more serious. And so with any individual that comes through the door, it's vitally important that you pick up on things like what their training has been like recently. Have they felt this before? Have they had a similar injury before? How long have they trained for? Are they, like I said, 1, 2, 3 years into their training? Or are they 15, 20 years down the line and finding things that are, if anything, maybe they're not able to hold up with what they've done previously and they're chasing their old selves, right? That can also be the case. And then the other one is kind of finding out if they have a time-sensitive goal. Most people that come through your clinic door will likely have a goal in mind, whether it be a race, whether it be a certain date, covering a certain distance. There is something, and it's why they've probably come to you, because 9 times out of 10, if they didn't have anything, they'd probably take the week off, put their feet up, and wait for it to kind of get a little better. But when they know there's a date coming up, I have one strikes to mind right now. I had a patient come to me 8 weeks out from London, unable to run 8 miles comfortably. And so kind of the transition of getting someone from 8 to 26 is a difficult one. But you have those realistic conversations with them and you say, well, we've got 2 options here. We really dial things back, get you desensitized and comfortable loading things to a certain point and build up to whatever point we can get to prior to the marathon. And then it's, often what I say is kind of, once you get to race day, you haven't really got much of a choice. Once you're at the start line, you're either going to finish it or you're not, right? And that'll come down to a number of different things. But usually, if they can make it to that week to 2 weeks out, having done something that fills them with a bit of confidence. So taking that patient as an example, we got them to running 18 miles, not completely pain-free, but tolerable levels of discomfort. And they were an experienced marathon runner, so they knew what those other 8 miles would feel like. Now, if that was someone who's had their first marathon, would I necessarily have gone with a similar route? Probably not. Probably wouldn't have been comfortable letting someone go from 18 to 26, having not done it before and in pain. It would have been too much, maybe. Again, you have those conversations with them, but for me, that mental and physical toll that's taking on them might have kind of both physical kind of issues going forward, but then also just the lack of enjoyment. You don't want anyone's first marathon to be full of pain and discomfort, although it's likely to be painful at some point. You don't want it to be a problem from the off.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, so if we flipped it and thought about the person who's contemplating running or has never really run in that kind of manner before, how would you start them off? Where would you tell them to start, and how would you progress them through that?
So I guess any new runner, I think, is, as I said earlier, is that the hardest part is getting out the door, right? Joining a club is also kind of one of these things you think, oh my God, what? Joining a club? All these experienced runners.
It can be intimidating.
Absolutely, right. And I think that there is this sense of, oh my gosh, all these people know what they're doing, or, God, here I am coming on wanting to join running and do my first run, this, that, and the other. But yeah, I think firstly is just getting comfortable, comfortable with a route, or knowing where you're going to go to and come back from, whether that be a loop, whether that be out and back, but have an idea of where you're going first. I think it gives you a start line and a finish line, and I think having that in mind helps both psychologically but also physically, of like, oh, if I am tired, I've only got to get to here before I'm home. Whereas sometimes just running for time is psychologically demanding. And so even I now hate running to time. If you said, oh, go run for 30 minutes, I'm just like, well, how hard am I pushing for that? And, it's like a never ending finish line, because the harder you run, the further away that 30 minutes gets. Whereas at least with a distance or with a start and finish line, you can say, right, I'm going to go around this lake and get home. Or it's, I'm going to do around the block twice. And that would be my starting point. I'd say pick a distance or pick a route that you're comfortable with, knowing that you could stop halfway and walk home, or break it down into chunks where you literally run to one lamppost, walk to the next, run to the next lamppost, walk to the next. You might use time along that route to break up the running, right? You might say, right, I'm going to run for 2 minutes, I'm going to walk for 1 minute. And that's something that like Couch to 5K does really nicely. It's a lovely introduction for people that want to be consistent with a periodized program that slowly builds them up to a point where they're able to run for 30 minutes continuously. It's free. You can download it on your phone. You can pop your headphones in. You can pick your narrator. I can't remember the options. I think what have we got on there? I think it's Gabby Logan, one of them, and I think there's a handful of people on there that will talk you through your kind of your plan, and so you can keep them in your ears all the way around. And it's something that a lot of people have used. As I said, my running club uses that same type of program. Just instead of one of the BBC presenters in your ears, you've got one of the run coaches telling you what to do each week. But yeah, it's finding something that you can do consistently at whatever those kind of goals that you set yourself are. So if that's, I want to go out 3 times a week, perfect. Don't shotgun your first run and feel shot then for the rest of the week so that you can't then persist or be consistent. Making sure that you're leaving something in reserve. At the end of that run, you shouldn't feel as though you couldn't go out and do a little bit more. If you do leave something in reserve, it means you're likely going to be recovering well for the next day or the day after, right? And I think this is where maybe I don't know if you've heard of it, but like lots of people talking about zone 2 training. Kind of, it's based on heart rate zones. So usually most systems use either kind of zones 1 to 5 or 1 to 6, depending on the kind of system you use or the watch you use. But zone 2 training talks about a level of intensity that is conversational, right? You'd be able to run next to someone and talk to them, right? And it talks about this kind of window where you'd be able to talk, or your heart rate is within this certain window. And I think the reason there's such a buzz about it is that it is low in intensity. It means you can be consistent. It means you can be persistent. And in turn, the gains that you get from being consistent probably outweigh any gains that you would get from trying to put in any extra intensity to your week, but then missing out on 2 or 3 sessions, right? So focusing first on just consistency and building a habit, I think is by far the biggest key when starting out.
And in a way, it sounds like there's this huge psychological element to it, in a way.
Yeah, I think with any habit, right, with any new change in behavior, there's a huge psychology behind it, whether that be breaking an old one or starting a new one. There are apps out there that try and help you through it now, and I've probably used 2 or 3 myself, but how effective they are is another thing again. What I've found helpful is kind of writing down what the goal is, why am I wanting to do it, and then reverse engineering a plan. And that can be, you can reverse engineer that as far as you want. I think, for example, my next one will be, I have a marathon coming up in October. So I have a race in a couple of weeks, but after that, I'll literally sit down, I'll look at my calendar, and I will reverse engineer what I want the next 3 or 4 months to look like up to that. And to begin with, it'll just be about making sure I'm still enjoying it, because you focus on the goal too early and it becomes a drain. It becomes too much, right? And so you lose consistency, you lose that habit, you lose that kind of persistence of training. But yeah, I think that psychological side of things definitely is a big part of, or is the hardest part of running. I think, like I said, putting the shoes on and getting out the door, the toughest part. And if you can do that well, and just get out the door, and that might be that you join a club, because often that accountability and knowing that there's going to be others at a session waiting for you to arrive makes it that much more kind of like, oh gosh, I best put my trainers on and get out then. And so if you don't have that, and you don't have that within you just to stimulate yourself to get out the door and train or do what you enjoy, then yeah, having a group or a WhatsApp group of friends that you can kind of message and say, right, what we doing on Wednesday, or what we doing on Monday or Friday, that will help, I think, drastically, that with those psychological barriers.
Definitely. And what a great alternative to, just being like, hey, what are we doing on Wednesday at the pub? Like, it's just such a nice way to sort of incorporate a different type of activity that doesn't revolve around, a pressurized sort of social situation in a way. And one of the things I was reading up on in preparation for this was sort of like, was cross training. And I know it's highly debated, about whether you do or you don't. I wondered what your opinion was, on whether you cross train, if you do, what you do.
Yeah, I think cross training definitely has its place, right? I think it's all dependent on what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to build to, where you're at in your running journey. I think, the use of strength and conditioning in and out of season is definitely beneficial. And kind of having, but again, I think it's dependent on what you have access to. many runners I know don't have a gym membership. So the access they have to kind of strength and condition is very different to maybe the access I have. And so in terms of cross-training, it's a way, I think, of offering a training stimulus to the body without the impact that running may offer the body, right? So you think of the effect it has on ankles, knees, hips, and generally your muscles and tendons feeling that little bit sore and achy. If you've gone out for a hard run, you're going to feel it the next day in your Achilles or in your knees or in your hips. And so if it means that we can cross-train the next day on a bike or on an elliptical, swimming, maybe doing some gentle strength and conditioning work, instead of running, because we wouldn't have run otherwise because we were too sore, then it's a perfect option, right? It allows us to increase training stimulus and progress in other ways, right? I think the other place that it really works well is with older athletes. So kind of you get a lot of runners that have run for 20, 30 years, and the volume they could run when they were in their 20s is drastically different when they're in their 50s. And so using ellipticals or bikes or pools and swimming as a tool to allow that cardiovascular benefit, keep kind of the body ticking over through a training plan without putting the same pressure, force, and demand that running might put on the body, is great. It's a beautiful option. But then naturally at the same time, I think there are times where you've got to kind of look at a training plan and go, right, well, actually, there's a reason why I'm trying to up my training load on running, right? If we are training for a marathon, we want to be able to tolerate those longer distances cumulatively to allow those adaptations to take place, to make those 26 miles feel that little bit easier. Do I think that cross-training is essential for everyone? No. But if your body can't tolerate the running load that you'd like to put through it, it's, like I say, a great tool to kind of continue those kind of training benefits through kind of through sessions and through times where running may not just be the only option.
It reminds me of you were just talking, and it reminds me of a CPD event I went to with Isle Lederman.
Okay.
Who, and very controversial, but very good at what he does, of course. And he was like, and I think I'm paraphrasing, but I think he said something along the lines of, if you want to be a runner, then just run. Don't do anything else. Just run. And I sat there thinking, not sure as a Pilates instructor I agree with this, but okay.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? I think, there is so much. I think when people see running, they think the only thing to running is running. I've been lucky enough recently to start my kind of Welsh Athletics coaching course, and there's so much more to the coaching side of running than just sending people out on kilometers, 400-meter reps, mile reps. There are technical aspects to running where you look at the kind of the technique being used throughout a certain distance, whether that be uphill, downhill, running for speed, running for endurance, and they will all change slightly, right? You look at the physiques of different types of runners. You can take the professional end, but there are obvious differences between runners that run for speed and runners that run for distance, and there's a reason for that, right? And those adaptations don't happen overnight. Those adaptations are, have been made over usually lifetimes when it comes to that end of the sport. And so, I mean, at the less serious level of the sport, where not everyone's looking to be a pro, I think just making sure that you're understanding your training volume, and understanding that there are different types of training available to you, and that you don't have to train as much as anyone else in your club does, or your goal doesn't have to be the same as someone else's goal. I think just reminding yourself of that every now and again will help, I think, just manage the rate at which you pick up injuries, or manage the rate at which you kind of find yourself in a bit of a hole.
Yeah, and I think as a novice runner myself, what I'm hearing is just get up and go, and just stay consistent.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the key, right? Is finding consistency. Because with consistency comes change, right? I think you can see that in any aspect of anyone's life, right? I think if you can be consistent at anything, you often get better at it. At least to kind of as far a degree as you can, and before then you have to look at things in maybe a bit more detail. But I think if you can begin with consistency, um, and leaving, as I say, something in reserve each time you go out, so that you're not coming home and thinking, oh my gosh, that was tough. I don't want to do that again. Because that again, it starts to trigger that mentality of, oh gosh, do I have to go out again and do it that hard, or so and so. You can start fairly easily. But then, when you have goals and targets and times in mind, then you can focus on kind of the nitty gritty, and the kind of the different types of training that are available to you.
Yeah, and I love the emphasis on that you put on it, for being just have fun with it, because I think sometimes with whatever we end up doing, whether it's a sport or anything else, we lose the sight of the fun of it, and I really like that emphasis that you've put back on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to have fun, right? I think with any sport, activity, hobby that you have, I think the minute you start losing the enjoyment, the fun of it, you then end up kind of struggling for motivation, because it becomes too serious. It feels like work. It feels like a chore. Um, and so, yeah, I think maintaining those social connections, finding fun in it, exploring, adventuring. Because at the end of the day, that's what the further you're able to travel on 2 feet, the more that's available to you. And I mean, as I said earlier, I'm lucky here in South Wales that there are coastlines galore, there are mountains galore, and kind of I've got a little like running community that we run with, and kind of we do a monthly trail run somewhere that most of us probably haven't been before. And so that we know once a month there is something we're all going to enjoy. And it might rain, it might be sunny, it doesn't really matter, we'll all be there. And then usually afterwards there is a coffee and a cake and something a bit more kind of relaxed about it. It's all done at a social chatty pace. We can get new people come along, and they make new friends and create their own little groups. And I think that's the beauty of it, is you start to find within that activity that there are people with very similar interests, or very different interests, but nonetheless you kind of get along, and your common theme is that you're traveling from A to B on foot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and just talking me through sort of, because what we've done is we've talked through sort of like a novice beginner level right up to sort of a seasoned athlete rather, or a seasoned marathon runner. And I really have a better understanding, I think, of the spectrum of what that takes. And you can see that it's very different how you'd approach either of those. I'm wondering, where can people find you if they have questions? Because please don't ask me questions about running if anyone's listening. I don't know what I'm doing. Ask Arwel. He's much better at this than I am.
No, of course. I mean, my website, AR Osteopathy, is always kind of accessible. The other option is to just drop me a DM on Instagram, again, AR Osteopathy. But the other option, I guess, is if you want to see more of the running side of things, I run a trail running community, as I say, in South Wales here. So We Run Wales is also on Instagram there, and kind of anywhere around there you'll probably find myself answering any questions that anyone has.
Nice. And I'll put all those details in the description box below. So thanks so much, Arwel.
Thanks, Silva.